consumer. But the fact that I'm
Uh-huh.
sitting in Silicon Valley, I tend to focus on more enterprise-centric plays. But if you think about India and the leverage India has, right?
Right.
Intellectual capital, again, team. Technology capital, now with democratization of, through thanks to AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, et cetera, the infrastructure is available. So you can build
Yeah.
world-class products sitting in, Bhubaneswar and in Ahmedabad and Mangalore, not just the main hubs, but even tier 2 and tier 3 towns and cities in India, rather than being in South of Market, Silicon Valley only. And so therefore, there's still a massive cost leverage, right? So you can have a front end, being an Indian company, let's say, or India company that moves to the US. You can have a front end that's here in Silicon Valley, your sales, your marketing, maybe your architect, but everything else, product development, inside sales, customer support, et cetera, can all be sitting in India, right? And so the amazing thing is, now, of course, given COVID and so on, everybody's freaked out about working from home or being remote. But Indian companies, by their very nature, had disparate teams. And so they were, I would argue, predisposed to saying, hey, we're used to not having the entire team being in a single building or, within, large buildings. We can make it work. So they were actually quicker, I would say, to adapt in some cases than their Silicon Valley counterparts. And then market,
Uh-huh.
right? So market is they're going after billions and tens of billions of dollars worth of an addressable market, because they realize that if I want to be a unicorn, not just on paper, but a realized unicorn, right? Then I have to go after a market. I need to get a decent chunk of that market to really be able to scale. So that mindset shift has come into India in a massive way. And then Iron Pillar actually did a fairly robust grounds up analysis of unicorn creation, which we published back in November of last year. And the numbers have already changed fairly significantly.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So
Very interesting.
So there were, at that time, I think 32 unicorns or thereabouts, where we split it up into, the well-known names around consumer, the Olas and Oyos and so on. But then, you have enterprise, and enterprise is B2B in India, but then B2B or SaaS looking at the global world. And that's what gets me excited. So it's companies like InMobi and Freshworks and Dhruva and so on. We think, Unifor and Servify will also join their ranks, but that funnel of companies that are going to be the future unicorns is just tremendous. And we think, well north of 100 unicorns are going to be created from India over the coming years. So it's still going to lag behind China, going back to your China comment, but I think that gap is going to be reduced. I mean, we're sort of creating a unicorn, at least one, it seems like, on a monthly basis. And you extrapolate that out, it's not going to be, and by the way, that's accelerating, because what we realize is majority of the unicorns had been created just in the last 2 years, and those had only been around for 5 years. So not only is the pace accelerating, but the time to go from founding to to $1 billion enterprise value is actually getting squished. And that's because of the mindset shift, and so it's pretty darn remarkable. So it's still U.S. #1 in terms of number of unicorns.
Sure.
China clearly there, but India is coming right up.
Is India third?
I don't know if India is third. No, Europe. I mean, again, if you call Europe as a whole, it's definitely higher than India, but. I think UK itself still may have a higher number than India. Yeah.
In terms of VC spending, India is the third largest.
That's correct.
Market in the world. So I want to ask you about one of the issues with the Chinese companies is they're starting to have a global presence. Right. And I know these Indian companies have served global companies from India. But with your portfolio companies and the companies, technology companies you're seeing today coming out of India, do these companies have global potential or not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, this is what I would say. Almost, I would say every single company that gets to a certain scale, and when I say a certain scale, call it a 10 million ARR, annualized, annual recurring rate, kind of a number from a software standpoint, on the enterprise side, and I would say even on the consumer side, has a non-India portion to their overall revenue mix. What I mean by that is, if you take a look at just Fresh to Home, the fact is that they are in the Middle East and now. ClearTrip, big chunk of their revenue, even though they may be considered an India company, a big chunk of their revenue is actually non-India. And you
So
look at
you can book on ClearTrip here in the U.S., right? You can book a trip or book a hotel.
I do all my local travel here on, as and when I'm allowed to get back on a plane. I do it using ClearTrip because it taps into what's called a GDS, a global distribution system. So it doesn't matter which airline and where you want to go. It could be here in the U.S. It could be, Latin America. You don't just have to book when you're traveling there. So yes, so please everybody, use ClearTrip. It's a phenomenal product. But even on the consumer side, you look at, obviously, Oyo is a global brand now. You look at even Zomato and Swiggy.
Tell people what that is. I know what it is, but you tell them.
Yeah, so Oyo is, how should I say it? It's basically a completely vertically integrated hotel brand. So initially, it started out by bringing new fixtures and fittings and a makeover for tier 2, 3, 4 hotels, primarily in India, to spiff them up and make them more desirable, especially for young people. But now they've gone so far as to even buy a hotel in Vegas, of all places, and SoftBank has poured a lot of money into them, and Ritesh, the founder and CEO, is Masa-san's protege, and Masa is taking Oyo globally. So that's one brand. Ola is a shared or ride hailing, largest ride hailing business in India. But again, and Zomato and Swiggy are food delivery, logistics companies, but again, with their eyes set on going beyond India. But specifically on enterprise, I mean, I've known seed stage entrepreneurs who say, you know what, we know our market is going to be in the US and Europe. So there may be 2 co-founders. One ends up staying back in India and working on product, and the other one moves to Silicon Valley with, nothing in their pockets and saying, I've got to be here because this is where the market is. So they're thinking global from the get-go.
Okay, so I have a question about TikTok, which has been in the news a lot lately. Why has India banned TikTok and a lot of other Chinese apps in India? What's going on?
I think there could be there are multiple points here. I can only guess, and this is pure conjecture on my part, but I break it up into 3 categories, right? One is political, the other is economic, and the third is really around data security and privacy issues and things of that nature. But I think everything does sort of balloon up to this sort of political tit for tat thing that's going on between India and China. And look, I would not be surprised, and this is just me talking, so please don't take this as any official Iron Pillar commentary or anything like that. But we know that Trump and Modi are having a bromance, right? So they're very, very close in just their camaraderie. And I would not be surprised that there's some of that where Trump is clearly not a big fan of China, and of course he's brought this sort of TikTok September 15th deadline and this whole frenzy that took place between Microsoft and Walmart, etc. But there may be part of that that's playing. But if you're at not quite war, but you've had skirmishes where people have died, at the national border, and obviously there's no love lost between the 2 countries. This is a spillover effect, and on the other side, if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you want to give your people a little bit of a tailwind and say, look, we are going to do whatever is necessary for our economy and our entrepreneurs
Mhm.
and this sort of Make in India
Uh,
campaign. I mean, this plays extremely well into that narrative, right? And so all of a sudden, that TikTok massive space that's been vacated has now been taken over by, Chingari and Raposo, and there are a bunch of these other, short form video platforms that are just seeing massive uptick for obvious reasons.
well,
And
that just reminds me like how the US companies were blocked from getting into China, and then all the Chinese companies became, big tech titans. And so India is doing the same, where India has its own tech titans coming up partly because you blocked the Chinese. But on the other hand, I'm also thinking about all the new investment that's coming into India from, like you mentioned, SoftBank and from China and elsewhere in Asia, money pouring into India, and also from the US, Amazon and Walmart and others coming in, and Tencent and Alibaba. I mean, it is pretty interesting to see how the India tech has evolved over the past 10 years, and how really it's become much more of a focal point of Asian investment today than it was a decade ago. So any comments about that?
yeah,
I mean, why is SoftBank there? Why is Tencent there? Why did Walmart beat Amazon to the Flipkart deal? I mean, here you got these two U.S. companies competing for an Indian startup, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's plain and simple numbers, right? So it's you're looking at a population that's young, that's aspirational. GDP growth, yes, this year notwithstanding, is going to come back, and there's going to be a march towards sort of this $5 trillion number, and everybody realizes that. So India became, quite honestly, over the past few years, a proxy economic battle between or among the giants around the world, right? So the Chinese were looking for a growth engine. Where do they go? India is the obvious one. And so they came with a vengeance, with especially Jack Ma and bringing, with Paytm and so on, and Jack and Mathasan are buddies. So SoftBank came, and so it was a little bit of a good old boys club, having a field day. Now, the amazing thing is, and if I just zoom out, and we could talk about this for hours because I'm quite passionate about this. All of a sudden, the Chinese are sort of forced to pull back. And this is not just a TikTok phenomenon, by the way. There are all sorts of rules and regulations around Chinese money and even Chinese LPs and funds and things of that nature. So there's a lot of, backdoor or sort of, behind closed door kind of conversations going on, because there's still a lot of unknowns. But that having been said, what has happened as a result is now the U.S. players. I mean, I'm just not just talking about Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Facebook, the FANG variety, but I'm also talking about the large private equity players. So if you think about what has happened with Reliance Jio all of a sudden, right? So these guys are very, very smart people. I mean, Mukesh Ambani is one of the smartest, business people in the world. But then these investors also said, wait a minute. Yes, India is a proxy battle for, the Alibaba versus an Amazon, Walmart play, but there has to be a homegrown giant. There has to be a homegrown sort of juggernaut, and who better to do it than Mukesh Ambani? So boom, everybody just piles on because they think, and I think they will be proven right, that Reliance, whether it's at the holding company level or maybe even down at the subsidiary level on the retail side or what have you, might be the first $1 trillion company to come out of India. That's the bet that they are making, and it's in no little part because of the pullback from the Chinese that has been now brought about. So this is another way. Now, I don't know if this was intentional or coincidental, that I think the Indian government or Modi trying to get closer to the U.S. and potentially to Trump to say, look, I am now open for business with the who's who of the U.S., right? And I am in turn going to create, opportunity and employment, not only in the U.S. because the companies are going to do well, but also in India because presumably with this capital comes job creation for, for the locals. So,
Right.
there's a lot of this interconnectivity in that particular proxy battle.
Right. There's a real government push now behind tech innovation. I think it used to be that in China, they would say you would succeed with the government. In China, in India, you would succeed in spite of
The government.
the
That's right.
government. So
No, but
now, I guess,
yeah, but I have to give the government gets a lot of things wrong, and there are a lot of issues around regulations and things keeping on
yeah,
changing. But I would go as far as saying that I would not be here, and Iron Pillar, quite honestly, would not be here were it not for the Indian government. And the reason I say that is because the Indian government actually set up, believe it or not, a multi-billion-dollar fund of funds to invest into venture funds that are in turn investing in Indian startups. And so we at Iron Pillar are actually structured as a dual fund. So we have a rupee India fund and a dollar Mauritius fund.
uh-huh.
Big chunk of the India rupee fund is actually government money, that's managed by an organization called SIDBI, which is a small industry development board of India. And so, this is really fresh thinking, and,
Oh, yeah.
even now they're talking about tax relief for capital gains on startup investing, for example. I mean, things of that nature,
Okay.
are quite forward thinking. So, hats off to maybe it's the Indian Venture Capital Association, maybe it's some of the larger funds. And I'm sure it's in part because of, there's actually a former venture capitalist who is a cabinet minister in India, which doesn't usually happen in other parts of the world, whether developed or developing. So I think there's just new thinking that's coming in, that's progressing, the country, or making the country move in the right direction from an innovation and a startup economy standpoint.
Right, right. Well, I can't chat with you without asking you about the impact of the coronavirus disease in India. I understand that India is, in the thick of it, as many other nations are. So how has that impacted your own investing and your own thinking about India's tech future?
No, look, what's been, well, first of all, I have to start with the fact that, look, India now has the highest daily reported rate, and of course, many are still untested, and so the numbers are bound to be higher than what's published. Thankfully, whether it's because of young population or the fact that we're just used to certain pathogens or sort of unclean environment that we've been saved, at least from a fatality percentage standpoint. But having said that, it is growing, and it's growing very, very fast, and so it has disrupted lives. It's disrupted business, which is probably the understatement of the year.
Yeah.
But this is what I have seen, though. This is what gives me confidence, makes me an optimist. One of the first, WhatsApp groups that I was invited to be part of was actually a COVID-19 WhatsApp group formed in India. I want to say either in, I think, late February. It wasn't even in March. And then there was a subgroup that was created that was only focused on ventilators and ICUs technologies, right? And so all of these folks from startups, large companies, collaborating, ideating, sharing thoughts, saying, hey, you should do this, you should do that. So that level of collaboration, which of course has continued with startups, by the way, within the Indian ecosystem, sharing ideas, sharing best practices, workflows. What happens if you find somebody who is COVID positive? How should you deal with this, that, or the other? How should you think about mental well-being? I actually just spoke this morning with the head of HR for Unifor, as a matter of fact, and that company has really done well in terms of taking care of its employees during the pandemic. And I was asking her, I said, I need best practices from you that I can then go ahead and disperse throughout not just our portfolio, but really broadly throughout the startup ecosystem. So she has sent me a a whole document, which I'm gonna make available online. And it's that camaraderie, it's that, positivity around humanity in a environment when everything else, if you start looking at the news and so on, you'll just go insane and get depressed. I think
Yeah.
that's the positive light that especially entrepreneurs bring, because they are by their DNA the ultimate optimists, and I think that's what the world needs.
Sure.
And they're definitely playing a role in India, even in the current environment, and
Okay.
especially in the current environment.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me encourage anyone to chat here with us, and or to save your chatting to the networking session, which will be coming up soon. And we'll go back to screen share here for a second, and encourage anyone to ask a question while we still have time. And if you don't want to ask a question during the chat, then we can ask it live during the networking session. And you should have received an email with the login for the Zoom meeting. It's a Zoom meeting. Oh, someone does have a question here. That's good. It's a very broad overview. Okay, a question, but it's relevant. What are the major tech trends in India now? Like if you had to name 3 major tech trends.
Yeah, so the major tech trends, I would say I'll focus on 2 on the consumer side and 1 on the enterprise side. On the consumer side, I mean, look, we have the lowest data rates in the world. We have the cheapest, but still fully functional smartphones in the world. So what is the natural conclusion from that? Natural conclusion is there is this pent-up demand for consumption. And therefore, people are consuming content, thanks to reliance and this push towards 5G. I think you're going to have video consumption and therefore gaming and live streaming. I was talking yesterday, believe it or not, to cohort of NASCOM, deep tech and enterprise startups, and it was just remarkable the quality of AI, machine learning, and deep learning type of startups that are coming out of India, because they are, PhDs at IITs. They may have, gotten their sort of chops at large companies, whether they're multinational tech giants, and then they see the opportunity around them, and they say, "This is the time for me to go and do this." So the other major trend that I would say is just the escalation in terms of really compelling and interesting startups that are coming out of India. The other piece, by the way, one that's close to me, is around sustainability. So there is this, the gap that continues to exist between supply and demand when it comes to energy. And so the level of innovation and adoption, whether it's EVs and homegrown sort of mobility solutions, to really compelling, rooftop solar and other aspects, to large sort of wind capabilities. And I actually invested in one of those companies while I was at DFJ. I think that is something that is really, really interesting. So consumer, enterprise, sort of startup uptick, and really the sustainability and addressing this energy supply demand gap are 3 that come to mind. The one key gap, by the way, where I am looking for a potential unicorn that does not exist, and I think healthcare as a vertical overall is something that needs to be addressed. A lot of the gaps have been surfaced in the current COVID environment, and I think that's where startups will have to play a much bigger and better role. We have some that have percolated up, but nobody has really scaled to a level to be able to impact the broader India. I know, by the way, one thing I should mention is India is just not a homogeneous market, right? So India is multiple markets. There's the top sort of 1 to 2% that you hear about. They're on high-speed internet and completely online and iPhone holding and da 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 da. Then you got the big middle, and then you have probably the bottom 40 to 50%, which is an agrarian economy. We called it Bharat, and Bharat is sort of a euphemism for all of India, but really talking about those tier 3, 4 towns. And large companies are now being created through online access to content, community, commerce, et cetera, that addresses that very broad, 600 to 700 million,
Right.
which much of the world is sort of forgetting about. But there is, there was a gentleman named C.K. Prahlad. There's bounty at the base of the pyramid. I can't remember the exact phrase he used, but he focused on the bottom of the pyramid as where the real opportunity is, and
Yeah.
that's also where some of the startups are going now.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because that same parallel is in China with companies like Pinduoduo, which has a
Right.
very big rural following. That's its core audience is in the countryside. So very interesting. Well, we could talk forever. I was going to ask you about returnees. I was going to talk about the number of Indians who are running multinational firms, and whether the returnee factor is still in play in India. But maybe we should save some of that for the networking session. And
Sure.
let me just make a few closing remarks here before we.
There's a different link, Rebecca, to go to the networking session.
Yes, yes, there's a different, and so everyone check your email for the login to the meeting, the Zoom meeting, where we can all see one another. And then next, let me just thank all of you for joining us, and thank our series sponsor for this September and October series, Invest Hong Kong. Thank you very much for your support. And our next show, our next couple of shows will be again in September 24, Andy Tang from Draper, another Draper connection.
Yeah, say hi to Andy for me.
He's also running Draper University. And yeah, so that's big. And he's also a partner at Draper Associates. So please join us for that session. And actually, there's going to be a little bit later. It'll be 5 p.m. Pacific time instead of 4 p.m. our usual time. And then after that, we have Roy Bahat, who is running Michael Bloomberg's fund, Bloomberg Beta. And he's based here in Silicon Valley. And they're a very interesting venture fund. And Roy will tell us all about it September 30th at 4 p.m. And again, Invest Hong Kong, thank you so much. Here's how to reach Silicon Dragon Ventures, Rebecca at Silicon Dragon Ventures, or news at Silicon Dragon Ventures. Okay, so so I'm going to see you in a few minutes. I'm going to sign off here, and then we'll see, hopefully, all of you at the networking session. Okay, take care. Bye. Thank you, Mohanjit. Very, very good comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.